the last in-person conference that that we attended. So today I'm happy to share my story of how I ended up becoming a CEO of a YC funded startup, Thematic, and how how we got to this stage where we are now. But realizing that this is an AI meetup, I also have prepared to talk about my research. It is a bit outdated, so I graduated in 2009. But my citations somehow are still growing like crazy. I have 2,500 citations of my publications that are all on natural language processing and analyzing text to figure out what it is about, what are the common themes, and knowledge representation. So the other part of my talk is really about commercialization. So how can you turn your knowledge in this specialized field into a company? How can you make money with it? And I'm also happy to show you a demo as well of our product. So not sure if like a round of introduction makes sense, but if people could just type in the Zoom chat, what would be more interesting to them? Is it more the research or commercialization or the demo, so that I can kind of tailor my talk respectively? Just type, is there a poll function?
Yeah, you guys can raise your hands. I will see a show of little hands. Alyona, you can ask, for instance, who wants, commercialization, and I will kind of eye the hands raised, and hopefully we'll get some idea.
Oh, wow. So I can see pretty much everybody talks about commercialization. So well, let's do a raising hands. I don't think we need to raise hands.
Yeah, I think we have a lot of majority for commercialization.
Perfect. So I might skip a bunch of slides then, but happy to talk about this, and we can have a discussion as well to make sure that I answer any questions you might have. But to start with, I just want to tell a very quick story about how I ended up in this field. I'm very passionate about natural language processing. And I learned about the fact that this field even exists back in Ukraine. So I'm originally from Ukraine, from Crimea. And I was in a room very similar to this one, mostly women, studying at a university. And I was studying German and English linguistics. And it was in a lecture of applied math when that lecturer said, by the way, there's this new field called computational linguistics, and this is where people use computers to understand language. And most of us were on a track to become either translators or maybe tourist guides. And when I heard that computers will be automating translation, I knew that I need to switch into this really cool field. And then he gave some other examples. Well, NLP is also when you have spelling errors in a document. I could very much relate to this. And ever since, I'm trying to be active, telling this story, because if I wouldn't have found out that this field exists, I would never have ended up doing this. So my path is kind of from linguistic rather than from computer science. And I try to speak at schools as well, because this is such a unusual field, but at the same time so prevalent in our lives. I moved to Germany and did my master's there, but then I ended up in New Zealand, and in New Zealand there is a university called Waikato, and they're famous for one of the first data mining books, and which came together with an open source software called WEKA. And most of you here would have heard of WEKA if you were doing any machine learning back in early 2000 and even later. So this is where I did my PhD, and my supervisor was Ian Witten, and my PhD was actually about keyword extraction. So how can you basically take an article and extract keywords that are similar to the ones that an author might have chosen because they understand this field well. And ultimately, I moved on from this to this general area of basically figuring out what the main topics in text, which is very much related to what I do at Thematic right now. So Thematic is a software as a service company, and we analyze customer feedback. And the main kind of foundation of this analysis is being able to figure out what are the most common themes in surveys. And this data is very different to the types of data I was doing during my PhD, but the main ideas are the same. And the idea is that you basically have the problem is that there are small errors, a lot of variation about how people. I'm just trying to find a relevant picture. A lot of variation about how people might be talking about the same thing. For example, third party, it can be spelled out as a word, or it could be three and RD as a third party. So when people are leaving feedback, they use very different words and phrases. And the idea of a theme extraction algorithm is to figure out what things mean the same thing, and what is a theme that is the most meaningful theme that you can assign to a piece of feedback. So this is how it's all related, and how I did this in my PhD is by using controlled vocabularies. So you can controlled vocabularies. So AgriVoc is one for agriculture, and it actually came as a book about this thick, and it listed all of the agricultural terminology and how people might be referring to the same thing. So for example, circulatory system is the same as cardiovascular system. So it says, if you see an author using this term, then use this one to assign it as a topic. And it also has some additional semantic relationships to the theme. And so what I found is that Wikipedia, that at that time was already huge and was growing, it has actually the same information, except it's crowdsourced and it's richer and larger. So you have blood circulation as well as cardiovascular system mapping to circulatory system. So I used Wikipedia in my PhD to normalize the terminology, but there were other difficulties. For example, heart could be the name of a song, or heart maybe like the heart shape. So Wikipedia has articles on these, and unlike an agricultural vocabulary that has some sort of a theme or domain or vertical captured and has less ambiguity, in Wikipedia it's incredibly ambiguous. And sorry, I'm just giving a talk here. So there's additional natural language processing that needs to happen to disambiguate the meaning of every single word and decide which article in Wikipedia would be the relevant one. So this was part of my PhD, and the interesting thing is, how do you actually evaluate these things, right? Because it's so subjective. if you give two articles to different people, they would come up with very different ideas of what this article is about, and they would name them differently. So the way you do it is by using consistency. Consistency is basically how two people, how likely are they to agree with each other? And professional indexers and libraries are more likely to agree with each other compared to students, for example, who might do the same task. And so the way I did it is by basically creating data sets where the same people or gathering data sets, the same people analyze the same article. So I would analyze their consistency and then test the algorithm's consistency with this, with each person, and then average this. So if the algorithm can't be distinguished from from another person, then we have achieved human competitive performance on this task. And indeed, Maui, in some cases, was more accurate than people. For example, in the tagging case, it was more accurate. In the case of term assignment, where it was tested against professionals, it wasn't. It was close. So, and it was much better than the baseline, which is using TF IDF to basically figure out what are the most common, what are the most prominent topics. Let me see. So commercialization. So when I graduated, I knew that academia wasn't for me. I loved WEKA University, but probably because of my upbringing, I'm definitely have a kind of a sense of hustle in me. And this is how I ended up in New Zealand in the first place and was able to leave Ukraine. So I'm always trying to find cool opportunities and cool things to do. And most of all, I was frustrated in academia that people might be doing the research and using Thematic, and it was an open source, Maui was open source project that I was working on. But I really wanted companies to use the research that I was producing. And so I ended up joining a company called Pingar. And this was 2009, so it was financial crisis. And this was literally the only company in New Zealand that was doing anything related to NLP and AI. So this is their slogan: discover new value from unstructured data, extremely generic, and it was an interesting experience. I stayed with Pingar for 3 years. And what we ended up doing is basically create, at first we were planning on figure out how to automatically create a report. So if you search for something, to straight away create a report from the first top results. And the use case was for any publishers who want to charge for the full articles, but they wouldn't mind including a snippet in the report. And we created a prototype and we started demoing this, but people weren't really interested in this. They said, oh, that's very cool, but nobody actually wanted to put their money down and buy the software. So then we pivoted into another application of NLP that is more kind of API based. So at that time, APIs became more popular, and there was a number of NLP APIs where you can copy and paste any text and it would tell you what's the sentiment, what are the most common keywords. And we started showing this as a demo, and people started straight away asking, well, can you redact all of the named entities from it, or can you detect profanities? Because that's what I care about when people post something, to very quickly do this kind of language analysis. But the application that ended up being the most successful for Pingar was actually metadata. So when you use something like SharePoint, a document management system, in order to find those documents, you need to be able to search for them. And the way SharePoint solves this, you have to enter the main topics, pretty much the core of my PhD. And nobody wants to do it. It's very tedious, and there's inconsistencies as well if different people do it when they upload their documents. So we used our technology to basically summarize these documents, and Pingar is still around, and they're selling it as a document management solution and record management solution to different companies. But the whole how the whole company developed, I was employee number 1, and within about 2 months, they hired a salesperson. And we didn't have any product at that time, so I was just like cutting code, creating demos, and the salesperson was sitting next to me, and he basically would pick up the phone and call people and say, hey, we're this new company, we're doing amazing things, we're better than Google, and you need to buy it. And he was incredibly aggressive, had no idea what we were selling, didn't talk to customers to figure out what is it they actually need. And he managed to do only one sale to a police department because they had some money left over in the budget and wanted to have it used up so that next year they get the same amount of budget. So this was my experience in sales, and the company ended up hiring another 5 people in sales, and like tried to start selling this technology that we were buying. And they actually got into a lot of trouble. They had to downsize massively, and they pretty much lost 12 millions in funding that they got. So this was my first lesson of how not to do it. And I thought, well, I joined this company. The founders were like around 50 years old. They had a chairman and a board and a business plan and investors. And I thought, well, if they couldn't figure out how to do it, then probably I should just do it myself. There's no way I can do a worse job than them. And so I ended up leaving the company to have a baby. And within the first, while on maternity leave, I decided not to come back. And I knew that I wanted to start a company, but I didn't know what the company should do. So I decided to consult in this general area of natural language processing and machine learning. And because of my research, the KEA and Maui, the open source projects, and I did some content while I was doing my PhD as well, which I recommend everybody to do it. People kept writing me emails, and one of the emails was from NATO. So NATO contacted me from Paris. I was still in New Zealand at the time, and they said, well, we'd like to use your open source software, but we need a proper implementation, and we need to use it to basically figure out what different scientists are publishing. And it turns out NATO employs 300 scientists, or 3,000 scientists, or they're kind of maybe not employed, but connected to NATO. And one of the ways they do is foster collaboration between them. So they need to know who is actually working on the same thing. So they need to analyze their research articles and connect them via the topics that the articles are about. And sorry, I just forgot that there is a chat and people have been asking me questions. I think we've covered what Maui does, and semantically rich knowledge graphs. I think we also covered this, talking about Wikipedia. And yes, this is how we did it. But back to my NATO story. They didn't want to use the GPL open source version, and at the same time, I convinced my my husband, who is a software developer as well, but he's very much interested in kind of high performance computing, and so he ended up re-implementing Maui from scratch, and we created this website and started a company and kind of started market Maui in this way. And how the conversation with NATO developed is that they said, great, you have the solution, but we cannot do business with a New Zealand company because NATO is we can only work with NATO countries. By that time, I had another consulting gig that also used Maui in England, and so I tried to kind of partner with them to have this deal done. And then a company from California reached out to me, and they did want to see a demo and a quote. And it's been going on for probably a year, and I haven't done a single sale. I was selling my time, my consulting hours, but I wasn't sell any technology, any software. And I was talking to my friend who recently sold his company and spent 3 years in Silicon Valley working for them. And he said, well, it's very simple. The secret is very simple. You need to do an enterprise sales course. And I trusted him, and I did have a bad experience watching salespeople at Pingar, and but I still decided, well, I'm just gonna do the sales course. And he said, you should do it with this guy. This is still in New Zealand, so don't ask me where you can take this course. But you should do it with this guy. It's like a weekend course, and I did it, and it changed my life. Coming from academia, I had no idea that there is actually art and science in sales, and it's not just having conversations. There is actually the idea of a sales pipeline that you're trying to take your prospect through. And another insight was that you don't say yes to everybody. You need to understand what is the problem that you're solving, and say no to everybody who wants something different. Whereas I was like willing to talk to just anybody about my research who was interested in Maui, whatever their use case was, I was talking to them. The third insight was that you need to ask the right types of questions. So if you're doing your first kind of sales meetings, you need to basically write them down so you don't forget. And these questions are very simple. They're not salesy. They're not like, are you gonna buy this? Do you wanna buy this? Do you have money for this? No, they're actually questions like, when do you need this by? What's your timeline? How painful is this for you? Is this problem for you? And so the turning point after I did this course, I was invited again by a company who were interested in Maui. They contacted me, and it was a media company called Fairfax. So Fairfax pretty much own most of the media in New Zealand and a lot of it in Australia as well. And they invited me to show them Maui, and I went there and I showed them the demo, and they said, this is perfect. We're just going to feed news articles into it, and when it tells us the topics, we'll let people we'll let advertisers bid on the topics. So this is how we're going to do our advertising bidding through Maui. And that makes sense. Sounds like it solves the problem. And so I said, well, when do you need this by? And this was a meeting in June, and they said, probably next year, January, February, we'll reach out to you. At this point, I knew that this is like another situation will just waste my time. But what happened in parallel, I have been running this NLP meetup in Oakland, and some people knew me through that meetup. And there were 3 other companies who contacted me, and they were interested in the analysis of customer feedback. And one of them ended up even sending me like a sample. Actually, several of them gave me like sample customer feedback data sets, and asked me, is it even possible to analyze this data? And so I already wrote a couple of scripts and showed them and explained them how they could do it. And so I was in this meeting at Fairfax when there was another lady who also came along to the meeting. And when the original people who invited me said it's going to be January, February, I turned around to her and I said, well, why are you interested in Maui? What's your interest in this topic? And she said, well, we're running these NPS surveys, and NPS stands for Net Promoter Score. And these are customer feedback surveys that companies use to measure how customer-centric or customer-friendly they are, to measure their customer experience. And NPS is a KPI. It's something that's reported for most public companies in board meetings, and it's a number that everybody is watching. And how it's calculated is when you get a survey from a company saying, hey, would you recommend us to your friends and family? And you give them a rating, and then they ask you, why did you give us this score? And so it's a way for them to collect feedback and then link it to the score as well. So literally people are telling them how they can improve the score, because if they give a low score, they say things like, well, your staff is rude. And if they give a high score, they're highlighting the unique advantages of this company that they should be doubling down on, like you have beautiful, your university, you have a beautiful campus, so they should be marketing this in their customer words, since it's what matters to them. So, and then she said, well, I did reach out to this company called Clarabridge in the US, and Clarabridge is probably one of the bigger companies that do NLP in the US. And she said, well, they wouldn't even talk to me probably because they think we're a small company in New Zealand, one of the largest companies. And because by that time it was like 4th conversation, I knew there's something there. So I came up with my enterprise sales questions. When do you need this by? And she said, well, ideally last month, because we started this program and there's a lot of push on me to report the insights, and none of the things I've tried work. So this is where I took this website and I dropped it completely. I stopped using it, and instead I tried to go back to those other companies who asked for my help, and I said, look, I have this prototype. I want to see if this is what you need. And I started showing them the demo of the prototypes that I built. And the demo was basically a bunch of slides. So I had a Python script that would analyze keywords in customer feedback. And then I would build histograms and then put them into a slide and make them almost like a customer insights presentation. This is what's driving your score down. This is how things are correlated. Little did I know, this is exactly how they present their findings to their senior leadership. So I actually solved the whole problem, and it was really working. They were really interested, and all 3 companies that I ended up talking to, and one of them was a market research technology company that knew a lot about how this problem needs to be solved. And the managing director was very motivated to have this solved. And we probably met for an hour 10 times in the next kind of 3 months. And ultimately, after the presentation, I did my next enterprise sales question. Would you like to see a proposal? This is when they tell you whether they're ready to buy, and it's a very soft question to ask. It basically converts them to a sale if they're interested in. And all three said that yes, they would like to see a proposal. And now I had to figure out how to charge for this thing. And so I went back to the guy who I did this enterprise sales course with, and asked him for advice. And he's like, well, what's the value of an insight? You can put any number on it. Charge high, give say like $70,000 to one of those companies. And I felt like I couldn't do it. I didn't have the courage to put such a high number, but I like mustered up to put the highest number I could think of, which was $1,500 a month. And two of them said yes, and the other one negotiated, which ended up more of like in a partner agreement, but they still paid roughly the same. And so this is how we signed our three customers, and now we kind of needed to build this end-to-end experience. And at this point, I convinced my husband to actually join me and help me build the product, because while I knew how to do the R&D and I was getting the hang of sales and a bit of marketing, I didn't know how to build a product, and I didn't know how to make a scalable product. And he joined me. And the way I managed to convince him is, at the time, he worked for one of the coolest companies in New Zealand called Serato. They did software for DJs. If you go to any club in the US, they're most likely, they use Serato DJ, and he loved his job, and it was very difficult to convince him to leave. But he said, I'm really interested in living in Europe for 3 months, then in New Zealand for 3 months. So I ended up convincing him that if we do it together, we're gonna have the freedom to do whatever we want, and we could go to and live in Europe. And so he quit his job, and we started working on this together. And eventually we started kind of building our website, and this is one of our recent website versions, but we from the very beginning, we started writing blog articles, and one of them was how to analyze your customer feedback manually, where we explain how you do it manually. And Stripe picked it up, and they ended up becoming a customer of ours. And at the same time, we applied to get into Y Combinator through a complete coincidence as well. And Y Combinator, when they heard that Stripe is using us, they admitted us into the program, and we moved to Silicon Valley and started growing like crazy in those 3 months, and raised our seed funding, and then started building our team. And this is what I do full time. I'm pretty much managing a team. We're 15 people now. We were about to raise our Series A. We have more than tripled our revenue from our US customers. And then COVID hit, and we left our apartment in San Francisco and moved back to New Zealand. And we have a team here as well. So we're doing like a remote thing, like most companies do at the moment, I guess. So that's our story. So what Thematic does, we collect or connect to different feedback sources, and there are so many tools and review sites and complaints as well. And then we analyze this data, we figure out the themes, we built a way of adding the human element into the data, and then we create reports, visualizations, basically. Sorry, this should be how Sematic works. So this is the story. So I did say that I'm gonna show you a demo, and it's gonna be a quick one, and then we can do a discussion. Maybe I can answer some questions. Let me just open it up. So this is the same demo that I showed at the Bay Area NLP meetup. And it was a little embarrassing because Rob Monroe is one of the organizers, and I completely forgot that he used to work at Amazon and did Amazon, did a lot of work on Amazon Comprehend. So, and what this demo does is actually it's taking customer feedback that we scraped, customer feedback reviews, and we ran it through a lot of through a number of NLP APIs that are still very popular. So what you're looking at here is our portal, but instead of showing you Thematic, I'm showing you results from IBM Watson, and a lot of these API have different ways of solving the problem of analyzing feedback. So this is actually one of the better one, probably. IBM Watson, the classifier. So it basically comes with a predefined taxonomy. So under travel, you have travel with kids, for example, and it automatically figures out that this piece of review is about traveling with kids and groups it here. And it's not bad, but if you look a bit deeper, why this data set, which is about air travel, would be talking about roadside assistance? It doesn't. So like the accuracy of the analysis is pretty poor. And in fact, all of the reviews are about travel, not 60%. And so these results aren't very useful. You can't really make any conclusions based on this data. If you use the key phrase method, so basically that figures out keywords, you get a laundry list of keywords. So they've picked up that flight attendants I mentioned a lot, but you can see that it's again, the themes aren't organized into our taxonomy, and you have a lot of redundancy. So excellent customer service, excellent service, excellent flight. So the themes are relevant. They do appear in customer feedback, but they're not very useful. And these are some of the better ones. This is one of the better APIs as well on this data set. So a lot of the times when people say, well, why people will not just use NLP APIs, and that's because on this data, they cannot get any useful results. So this is Amazon Comprehend, and it's basically a bunch of single words. Topic modeling is what people think we do. This is not what we do. We do theme analysis, and again, it's not useful. And the reason why these solutions don't work on this data, because they weren't designed to work on this data. They were designed to work on news articles, just like Maui was. And they will work fine and probably amazing on some of the data sets, but on customer feedback, they unfortunately, they're going to fail because they weren't designed for this data set. And so when we built Thematic, we built it specifically for customer feedback for data that's shaped in this way. And already our raw results, as they come out from the system, look much more meaningful. So there's some generic themes, but you can see food. Under food, we have great food. Then there is price, customer service, good. There's some redundancy here and something we're continuously working on. But the core of our offering is actually the ability to edit these results yourself. So let's see. human goes into the themes editor and refines the results by basically dragging and dropping things, just like you would do organizing files and folders. And you are able to merge things, delete things that aren't relevant to you. So for example, airplane seats, all of these were merged. So the algorithm tries to merge itself, but if it can't, then this is the person might be able to do it. And then we also have this idea of mapped phrases, which are automatically discovered. So nobody's typing them in, they discover it automatically, and there's a lot of them. And you can go in and check every single phrase, like you have this transparency. So this is this element of explainable AI. You can explain why the algorithm has tagged this piece of data with this particular theme. And so you can make the results more accurate, more relevant, and with that, the insights will be more likely to be heard. And then once you have your refined results, the other part of Thematic is visualizing this data in and allowing you to filter it, showing you, for example, check-in and boarding. What's the sentiment around this theme? How is it trending? And so not only there's roughly the same number of people who talk about this theme, but its impact used to be negative, and now it's actually trending towards positive. So we can help people understand if they work on something, did it actually make a difference? Did people notice that they fixed the Wi-Fi on the plane, or their security procedures? How do they feel about them? So that's a quick demo of Thematic. So stop right here. We have 13 minutes left, and I'd be very happy to answer any questions. First question from Sachin about where YC was helpful and not helpful. I get this question a lot. For us, coming from New Zealand, YC was transformative, life-changing in several ways. First of all, the whole mindset. As you remember, I convinced my husband to quit his job so we can travel the world and have this lifestyle company, which is not at all and I don't have to tell many of you that this is true. The mindset in Silicon Valley, you go big or you just don't bother. Somebody who has skills in NLP and AI can earn hundreds of thousands of dollars through a job at any of the amazing companies, and can be very well financially. But when you start a startup, you don't do it to do a lifestyle business. You do it to make a huge company. And for us, joining YC was the realization of, wow, we can actually do it. This is actually a problem that we're solving and has a huge market, and we are the right people to do it. They've chosen us. They think that we can do it, and recognize our progress so far. And the other thing that helped is, of course, the network and access to investors, like validation, and they also helped with understand kind of what tools to use to grow faster. And there was pretty much everything was helpful. In terms of not helpful, to be honest, I can't think of anything. I'm such a fan of YC and their mindset and what they deliver and how they are constantly asking for feedback, and just the nature of people there, very much a fan. So I think everybody should try to get in. And next question, how does a business model built on open source compare to proprietary? Well, I didn't manage to make my open source model work, so I'm not sure. There are different models. So there's obviously the GPL license means that if somebody uses the software, they have to open source the entire project. so it doesn't lend itself to commercialization. But there are other models, other licenses in open source right now that are much more suitable. And companies that do well tend to provide consulting services. So deep learning for J, for example, SkyMind, this is how they did their model. And I think they did really well in this. I would encourage you to check out how they did it. It's also a YC company, but they used deep learning open source. Proprietary, you just have full power, and I don't think there's open source SaaS products. So the whole idea of building a company and a business model is that you're solving somebody else's problem. So whether it's something is open source or not, it's almost secondary. It's a tool. Whatever you use is to help you solve a problem. So it's different model to and works differently. Next question from Divi, resources for learning about enterprise sales. I think there are some amazing books on Amazon, and if you like reading books, then I highly recommend this. If not, SaaStr is a lot of these kind of SaaS networks have articles on enterprise sales. So where I learned is sales events. So there are sales meetups that I would go to and just listen to how people talk, how they try to upskill each other and share tips. Stephen is asking, Thematic is Thematic proprietary? I didn't get the point when you abandon open source. Yes, it is proprietary. Basically, I had this open source software that I built during my PhD, and it did not work on customer feedback. So I needed to develop it from scratch. So I took some ideas, some knowledge about how language works, how themes can be created from text, but I ended up writing every single line of code was written specifically for this problem, and I did not open source it. But there are some open source projects of mine on like similar topics that are floating around. I just abandoned it because I didn't have time to raise children and do a startup at the same time and help people in open source, support them.
Any other questions? Going once, going twice. Okay, something is coming.
Okay, let me see. Competitive advantage of Thematic. Our competitive advantage is that you don't have to train our system. You give it any set of feedback and we figure out what the themes are. So it's much faster to get set up, to get the first result, to the point where we even like launched a free version. We only allow businesses to sign up for it, but it is a competitive advantage to be able to be so agile and so nimble. And then human in the loop demo that I showed you, how you can edit the results. This is also something unique nobody else does. Have you seen great NLP performance from newer models? Yes, so we use it for sentiment analysis, some of the latest models, but we don't use it for themes. We just haven't, we use it indirectly. So for example, if we see somebody talking positively about customer service, so that's how we know the sentiment using some of the newer models. We could construct a theme, great customer service or poor customer service. Where should New Zealand startups incorporate? In order to get into YC, you need to incorporate in the US, so a Delaware company. So if you do it early, it's fairly simple, and YC actually help you do it by, there's a legal firm that does it for free, but we basically started the company in New Zealand and then flipped it so that now it's a US company that owns a New Zealand company. I'll ask Jeremy's question about the competitive advantage. So it's self-supervised. So it's not a supervised system. So it doesn't require training. It basically, the themes emerge from the data. So no training is needed. Every single data set gets its own themes. So we don't have like a pre-trained airlines model, a pre-trained customer support ticket model. We have a language model for customer feedback. This is how people talk in the area of customer feedback. Sometimes we have, this is how company called Vodafone, how their customers talk about when they leave feedback. And that model just captures things like synonyms. But the actual themes, they're not tied to any model. And with that, you get much higher specificity of themes. So, and with that, we're not using any labeling, right? Because we use labeling for testing, but we don't have to train custom models. So I was trying to explain this. Stephen is asking, lessons learned, would you do it again? What would you do differently? And are there even enough enterprise sales in New Zealand in NLP to sustain a company? Well, that's the great thing. From the very beginning, we never sold only to New Zealand companies. We signed up Stripe, and now we have most of our revenue is from outside of New Zealand, probably 80%. We have lots of customers in US, Canada, Australia, some in Europe. And this is the advantage. It doesn't matter where you are. If you can have a website and you can jump on a Zoom call, you can sell anything to anybody. And it's an enterprise is more of a like a stretchy title. So enterprise, I say that we do enterprise sales, but really we do mid-market. So those types of amounts, $1,500 a month, it's not considered enterprise. True enterprise, like $1 million. And this is not something we do. Our average deal size is 45,000. Some companies pay us a couple of $100,000 a year. And you can still sell these types of deals via the internet, via Zoom. And what I would do differently, if I could do it all again, I would try to, so once I have signed those initial 3 customers, what I should have done, and I didn't do, is actually open up the solution to more people. For many years, we were very selective to like only selling to people who approach us, like more inbound, and you could only request a demo. You couldn't try the product out on our website. I was like always worried, is it good enough, right? So well, the problem with this is that you don't get enough feedback back from your customers, ironically, right? So what we're doing now by having this free version is opening it up more. Significantly more people sign up to try the software out, and then they provide the feedback back to us, and we can get much better at figuring out what's valuable, what's working, and what doesn't. And this is something that I should have done and I haven't. And if you are starting a company, I hope you do this. I think we're out of time. So last question, I answer maybe general opinion of Spacey and other APIs. I'm very grateful that people are building solutions like Spacey. I think these people are selfless for putting so much work into open source NLP solutions that are enterprise grade scale, and I'm very, very pleased to see that a lot of them find ways of making it worth their while, commercializing some of them, and I think it's amazing. We can all kind of benefit from it, so we don't have to build things from scratch. And in a way, this is what I did by making my solution open source as well. So maybe one day I'll go back to that. Cool.
All right. Well, thank you, Alyona, for the great overview. Thank you, everybody. I see everybody's thanking you as well in the chat. So thanks for joining us. Hope you stay well and productive and have fun in the beautiful New Zealand. And come back and tell us about your progress. Hopefully, you know, things will get back to normal. We'll see you back in the Bay Area. And we'd love to see a talk from you, Scale by the Bay in November, regardless of where it is. Thanks again, guys. Submit more talks, and we hope to see you at the next meetup. Cheers.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thanks for dialing in and so many questions. I'm grateful for everybody to be able to share my story.
Thank you, guys. Thanks again, Alyona.
Okay, thank you. Bye. Thanks for organizing, Alex.